things that affect landlords with tax. You know, if there is an investigation or you are contacted, obviously by the Inland Revenue, and you're on the hook for liability-wise, how should that be dealt with?
I mean, it's a scary time. People get inquiries, and they are often just routine and mundane. In fact, most of them are. Most of the time.
But landlords get really scared, obviously.
Of course, especially if you're not used to dealing with it and you get the letter drop in the post or you get a phone call. People are scared, and I understand that. I mean, I'm used to dealing with it in my world, so it's not as scary. But what I would say to people is don't panic, because very rarely there's any reason to. Often the issues are quite easy to resolve. Sometimes they're not, but often they are. And you usually find they're dealt with quite informally. It's not like it's not like the movies where they sit in front of you and shine a light on you and sweat out. It's nothing like that. It's very informal. It's often done very friendly. And often, to be fair to them, often done very fairly. They're trying to make sure you pay the right amount rather than trying to catch you out.
Yeah, I mean, look, landlords are an easy target. Let's face it, Barry.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you'd admit with that. Let's break things down and go back a bit in history. So in 2017, we had a chancellor called George Osborne. He abolished mortgage interest relief. Landlords were taxed, on turnover rather than profit on interest-only mortgages. That was phased in over 4 years, and then landlords were taxed on their basic rate of tax. Correct?
Well, they get basic. The theory is they're supposed to get basic rate relief on their mortgage interest without getting the higher rate relief.
Yes.
The way the actual rules work is much more profound and pervasive than that.
Right.
And the effect has been. I mean, I've seen landlords in recent months and years paying 200% plus rates of income tax on their rental income because of the way the rules work. And I mean, I could give you examples, but we'd be sitting here all night. The reality is, I'm not sure why I think this, but I do. I think it was done in error. I don't think anyone really understood what they were doing, and I think that nobody really understood the effect. I mean, I can't imagine anybody thought it would be right that you'd have a situation where landlords would be paying, as I say, up to 200% income tax rates on their rental income. I don't think anyone intended that. I just can't believe they did.
But they're not going to reverse it because there's too much money in the coffers, isn't there?
I'm not even sure that's the reason to reverse it. I think it's more politics, and politics always trumps economics when it comes to this stuff. You're not going. It's going to be very hard for any government who's putting taxes up, and particularly any
this government,
any government really, but especially one trying to put taxes up to make to give away a tax break to a perceived tax break to landlords who, let's be honest, you guys are not the most popular people on the planet.
No. Yeah,
rightly or wrongly.
No, exactly. I mean, look, landlords are in the bottom 10 of professions, unfortunately. I mean, look, I've just literally done an interview on Radio 2 with Jeremy Vine, and and I've said that you need to incentivise landlords to stay in the market and not sell their properties. I mean, that was the start of landlords exiting. I mean, just alone, I think I read that in one quarter alone there was 452,000 properties that were listed, of which 70,000 were ex-rentals. And of course, the biggest losers in that will be the tenants, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because landlords are reluctant to sell because the market's not buoyant and prices aren't exactly rising. And of course, the more properties that go on the market, the worse that position becomes. And you've got people in a situation where they're paying income tax rates that are more than the amount of income that they're bringing in. They're not getting capital growth, so they're desperately running for the door.
And then of course, they put the rents up.
Yeah.
It defeats the object for the tenants. Yeah. So let's move on to stamp duty.
Yeah.
Let's move on to how do we say it? We had a housing minister called Angela Rayner who didn't pay a stamp duty. What's all that about?
I mean, I understand the headline is very sexy to say that, and whilst I have no particular love for Angela Rayner one way or the other, I do think what she did was just not get proper advice. Now, she may have been very comfortable with the lack of advice. By not getting advice, she believed she could avoid paying some stamp duty. I think if she had...
But she's a government minister.
She absolutely has to answer for not taking advice.
Yes.
It was the actual facts of the case are fairly complex. And your average conveyancing solicitor wouldn't be able to. And I understand from reading what I read about it, her solicitors did say to her, "We can't give stamp duty advice."
But then they did turn and say you need to get tax advice,
Correct.
And she didn't take tax advice.
And there's no excuse for that. But the actual matter itself was fairly complex, and it's the sort of thing anybody could get wrong if they didn't get proper advice.
Fine. So give me some 2 or 3 top tips when it comes to stamp duty, which landlords should be looking out for, should be doing.
I mean, the reality is the days of of really obvious stamp duty avoidance is largely gone. I mean, at the top end of the market, you see a lot of people buying, and again, this comes with a whole range of other issues. So this is really for the sophisticated investor. The sophisticated investor, you'll often see them buying limited companies that already own property. That can often make a huge stamp duty saving, but it comes with a whole range of other issues, which is why it's very much for the sophisticated investor.
Yeah.
The days of multiple dwellings relief have gone. That's been abolished, and whilst that is a problem, I understand why that was abolished. There was so much abuse going on.
But there was stamp duty rebate companies as well, wasn't there?
I mean, I tell you, I bought my house, and I'll tell you a personal story. When I bought my house, I've got an annex in my garden. I've got another house, which I bought for, because I've
Is that where the butler stays?
That's for I've got a special needs son.
Oh, right, okay.
And it was for his long term. We were thinking he might.
Okay, yeah.
So we bought that, and we claimed multiple dwellings relief, because I know the rules. Most people did, but for about a year afterwards, we were getting letters from the sorts of people you're saying we've overpaid stamp duty, we can get it back for you.
Right.
I never paid it in the first place because I know the rules.
Right.
But the only discount you can now get if you're buying multiple properties is that if you're buying 6 together, you can get. So if you were buying off-plan 6 properties together, for instance, you can get commercial rates instead of residential rates or non-residential rates. As I say, multiple dwellings relief was a very valuable and important relief, but it was being, like all these things, when people abuse them, they get taken away.
And how does it come with regard to refurbishment and repairs? What's the tax liability? How does that work?
In what sense?
Well, so we have a refurbishment or we carry out repairs because obviously they pulled away that relief, didn't they?
Well, it's one of the more complex areas. It always has been. I don't think it's particularly new, but it's certainly got a little bit more complex. Is when people are spending money on that sort of thing, is deciding what is tax deductible, what's revenue expenditure, what is capital. So and capital broadly falls into a further degree of complexity as well. So for certain types of properties, you can claim capital allowances. That's an increasingly mainly commercial thing, and alternatively, you're looking at capital gains relief when it's sold. So, dividing up the expenditure between the different categories, it can get quite technical, and I'd be surprised if most people don't get that wrong. But to be honest with you, most people get away with it when they get it wrong, to be honest.
Definitely. And then let's talk about capital gains tax.
Yep.
Okay. Where that sits with a company, where that sits individually, what are the common mistakes that landlords do? What should they, what type of things should they be doing with regard to capital gains?
There's a lot of procedural things that go wrong in capital gains. So the new rules requiring people selling residential property to declare it within 60 days and pay the tax and file a separate return. I've seen that overlooked. You'd think solicitors would tell people that they need to do it, but they tend not to. Again, another thing you often get overlooked, it's not really capital gains, but similar sort of thing. If particularly these days where people are investing through, most people invest through companies, we've had that discussion. If you buy a residential property in a company and you pay more than £500,000 for it, you're obligated to file what we call an 8-head returns down to the annual tax on envelope dwellings. Now, and it's a slightly bizarre set of rules because 99.9% of people aren't liable to pay the 8-head, but they still have to file a return. Right. And there's fines for non-filing the return. So we come across people all the time who they don't file it in time because they're not aware they have to. Solicitors don't tell them. We usually find out too late because they can maybe come and it's their year end and we're sitting down with them and they've bought something and they should have filed.
Yeah.
So that's most of the things that go wrong are procedural.
Just innocent procedural mistakes, yeah.
And they love those because they can fine you for them.
Yeah, of course. And there's no defence; it's retrospective. What about making tax digital, which is coming in for landlords? How's that going to affect them?
I mean, it's again. I don't. They've sold this as a simplification for years and delayed it.
It's more of a ball ache, isn't it?
Delayed it for years and years and years, but it's this time I think it's definitely coming. It's a burden because there's going to be firstly record keeping requirements. They're going to have to file 4 returns a year instead of 1. I think the biggest burden is and this is the main reason why it's happening is the authorities will have much better visibility on the income that people are earning and how they're earning it and stuff.
And bearing in mind on that point, if we switch it to the Renters' Rights Bill, which actually got passed yesterday, they are having a landlord database. So you can see where we're going with that.
It's funny you mention that because one of the things, again, sorts of people who walk into my office relatively routinely, every so often you get, not even every so often, fairly regularly, you get people come in the door and the first thing is they fess up to you that they've had a property for a while and they've not been declaring the income.
Of course.
And they very often they've had a letter from the revenue which has triggered them coming in through the door in a scary letter. It's quite scary. It is quite scary.
Yeah, but can you imagine there's going to be loads more of those letters because the database is going to be mandatory.
Because, well, exactly the point. The amount of data they've got about. I mean, all agents are required to give their landlord information to HMRC. They've got stamp duty returns with tax references on it. Their property. The amount of the chances of anyone getting away with this long term is.
You've also got to realise, with one of my caps on, we own my deposits, the deposit scheme. So obviously the government have information with regard to deposits with the free schemes as well.
Yeah, and their sources of data are manifold, and which is why increasingly people don't get away with it, and why I get these knocks on my door from people saying, "Oh, by the way, I've just been told I should tell you I've got this letter," and I've got. And
so basically, you help people get out the shit.
Well, no, the good news with that stuff is, I mean, the good news with something like that is there is a mechanism in place for people to come, and even when they write to you, they say to you, you may want to use we call it the let property disclosure. You may want to use the let property disclosure to come clean. And if you do that and you come clean and you go through that process, they charge you interest on having not paid.
Yeah, of course.
But the penalties are kept to a minimum.
So what I want to ask you, you deal with the Inland Revenue. They're civil servants trying to get through to the Inland Revenue. It's like trying to get through to the courts. You've got more chance of getting through to Keir Starmer. That's another story altogether. But with regard to the enforcement and the number of tax collectors there are out there, tell us a little bit about the Inland Revenue and how they work.
Yeah, I mean, enforcement's definitely been ramped up over the last 5 to 10 years. I don't want to say they get more aggressive, but I think it would be fair to say they are more aggressive. But I certainly don't think they're as bad as most people envisage they are. It's patchy. So you'll meet people who work there who are perfectly friendly and easy to get along with and quite open, and you'll meet others who aren't, like in all walks of life.
Yeah, of course.
On the enforcement side, it really depends on what they're doing, why they're doing it, what office they come from. So enforcement is a wide range. So if you meet people who are dealing with criminal matters, and they're a very small group and very specialist, and as I say in my career, I don't think I've handled more than a handful of potentially criminal.
Right.
Okay, it's very rare. If you're dealing with people in the criminal sphere, obviously there's a very different culture to people who are just dealing with sort of like civil enforcement. When they're dealing with technical issues, so it's a very wide range. As I say, the more aggressive people you'll meet, the deal with the more difficult and more sort of contentious cases.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I want to ask for before we wrap this up, Barry, great information, is you've got landlords. I mean, 94% of landlords out there have had between 1 and 2 properties, and we're seeing loads of those landlords exiting or trimming down their portfolio because of the environment and stuff. Inheritance tax, give us some generic advice with regard to inheritance tax, what landlords can do now, gifts and all that type of stuff.
Right, so inheritance tax is probably one of the things we get asked about the most by landlords, because most people are thinking, I'm buying a property, it's probably a very long-term, it has to be these days, a very long-term investment.
Definitely.
So there's a pretty good chance I'll own it either till I die or very close to that point, and therefore it's going to be part of my estate, and therefore what can I do to minimise inheritance tax? And actually, it's for landlords, it's one of the hardest taxes. For most people, there are things they can do to manage their inheritance tax downwards in the right circumstances. That is probably, for landlords, it's the most difficult thing. There are some obvious things they should be doing. So to the extent that they can sacrifice the income, which is a big issue for many of them, they need the income. But to the extent they can sacrifice the income, they can look at giving them away, but then they have to consider the capital gains tax effect.
And the 7-year rule?
The 7-year rule applies to any gifts. It's designed to stop deathbed planning. It's designed to stop people giving away all their assets on their deathbed and then suddenly dying without assets and not paying inheritance tax. Any gift you make drops out of your estate over a period of time, and it's gone within 7 years. But as I say, if you give away, the obstacles to landlords, typically, one is the income that they typically need. It's usually a pension type income to them. 2 is the capital gains tax on giving it away. Sometimes there's stamp duty considerations, particularly on mortgage property. So there's a whole range of things that prevent landlords doing a great deal of inheritance tax planning. We've talked briefly in the past about trusts. There are some trust planning ideas around that landlords look at, but those are, those can help, but they require landlords to sacrifice income, which for many is a problem. They're using that income, to survive in retirement.
And definitely. And if what top tips should a landlord use or do when it comes to actually getting a tax advisor, a tax accountant? What questions should they be asking to make sure they get that right person battling on their side and working for them?
Whilst specialists are good, they're not everybody needs a specialist. There's a lot of really good guys out there who know enough to give very good advice. You need to find someone you can trust. If you've got some people have advisors they can trust, that would be my first port of call, because trusting relationships are worth. You need people you can speak openly and frankly to, and that only comes with trust. If you don't have a trusting relationship, then speaking to somebody like me or somebody or in our profession, you usually find most of the people who are specialists, they deal with a whole range.
And recommendation, of course.
Yeah, correct. Ask other landlords, other friends. As I say, 99.9% of it, we do tons of marketing, but 99.9% of our business comes through referral. It's just where it comes from.
Definitely.
People walk through the door, or they don't walk coldly through the door, they've been pushed through it by someone.
Definitely, yeah, of course. So, wrapping this up now, final question. What advice would you give to landlords out there? There's all different types of landlords, obviously. There's bigger portfolios, whatever. What bit of gold nugget advice would you give on tax to our landlord audience?
That's a massive question.
I know I like to be complicated.
I don't think there is one thing. Everyone's got their own circumstances. For people who are doing long-term investment, I think the sorts of things you would want to make sure is you want to make sure you've got the right structure. So that nearly always, but not always, for people involves limited companies these days. You've got to be careful about that, because there are some pitfalls you can easily fall into with that. So getting good advice. If you've got long-term portfolios, thinking about things like life insurance to cover potential inheritance, particularly younger people where it would be inexpensive.
And how will that cover?
Die young.
So someone dying, the insurance will cover what?
Yeah, so the most common scenario, and it's particularly common with younger people who are investors, because most people worried about, most people don't expect to die young, but it's always a possibility.
Of course.
You've got a large portfolio, and it's if something happens to you, you're sitting on a very large inheritance tax portfolio, inheritance tax liability. You could, of course, sell property to pay that, but often people want to keep portfolios intact. A very efficient way of doing that is to look at a relatively cheap life insurance policy that will pay out to cover the tax bill when you go.
Yeah.
So those policies are written in a special way in trust to make sure they don't become part of the estate and subject to tax themselves. They go to the beneficiaries to pay the tax.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Yep.
Why should someone be a landlord in 2025?
Oh God, I'm not sure they should.
At least you're being honest.
Why should they be a landlord? If you look at history, and I don't have a crystal ball, but if you look at history as a good judge of the future, there's almost no other investment that can generate the same level of capital growth over a long period. The government and the environment are doing their best to make sure that isn't the case, with large amounts of stamp duty which put you behind the curve and all the other things. But still, you would expect over a relatively medium to long term that the return on property would be reasonably good compared to other investments. I think you can still get a decent yield if you know.
But it's long term.
Yeah, if you know your stuff and you get good advice, you can still get a good yield on the actual income itself. But yeah, it's hard to justify for the days of the small private landlord when the one or two property, they're largely gone. You're looking at
the professional landlord.
You've got to be
mindset.
You've got to be in it to invest on scale to make any sort of decent return.
Yeah, and that's why you're getting a lot of funds coming in. So how can the viewers, if they need a tax expert, how can they get hold of you?
Any way you want. I've got an email address which I'm sure you can give out.
We'll put that in the link below.
I don't mind people picking up the phone. If you go on our website, I'm sure the phone number's on.
And your company is?
Xeinadin, which I'm at the Woodford Green office.
Yeah.
There's offices all over the country.
Yeah.
I do get a lot of emails, so if I'm not as quick coming back to you as you'd like, I promise I read them all and I do come back to them. But
you're like a problem solver. You're like a Dear Deirdre, aren't you?
I do get a lot of those types
Dear
of questions.
Deirdre. Or we could do another. We could do another interview about embarrassing bodies. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Well, let's not do that because I've got a lot of those stories.
Okay, all right. Or we won't talk about Tottenham either, our football team, because that would just turn people off. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Barry, absolute top expert on tax. He's also going to be writing monthly for our website, Landlord Zone, as well as a monthly blogger. Please comment on the comments below and subscribe. I need more subscribers. If you want to keep doing this every month, and I'm happy to do this every month, subscribe. Thanks for your time. Subscribe now to Talking Property.